So with the R5c, Canon have given us a video-orientated version of their popular mirrorless camera, the R5. And in this video, I'm just going to run through the top 10 changes that are going to make the most difference to us video users. Perhaps the biggest change is going to be the one that's been talked about the most, and that is the removal of any sort of time constraints on your video recording. The R5 had that 30-minute record limit still, which we've seen on most Canon mirrorless cameras to date. The R5c has no record limits internally at all, just like the R3 had. And also gone is the overheating problems that the R5 had. Yes, they've improved the situation with firmware updates, but the R5 still overheats in quite a few of the most high quality video modes. The R5c, from what we've seen so far with our tests, has no such problems at all. So for long record times, you should be absolutely fine with the R5c. So I talked about this one extensively in our video review, but the camera actually has two different modes with the flick of this switch on the top. You can go from stills mode to video mode, and each one has a different UI, a different operating system. Think of this like putting both Mac and Windows on the same computer. The camera actually reboots and comes back up in the other one. And the advantage of this is that the stills side feels like a stills camera and the video side feels like a video camera with the cinema EOS UI that we've seen on cameras like the C70. It has that touch UI for easy touchscreen controls. It has all the video features and functionality and terminology that you're used to. It has 13 assignable buttons physically on the camera, as well as 5 pages of My Menu support where you can register any menu item you want onto that My Menu and bring up the My Menu tabs with an assignable button. It is so customizable for video work. But perhaps the biggest change is going to be the tools it unlocks. It unlocks waveform, false color, peaking, zebras, anamorphic T-squeeze. Things like having your waveform monitor is crucial for video work and exposing properly. On the R5, we only had a histogram, and that actually disappeared when you started rolling. Whereas on the R5c, it is just like we've seen on the C70. You can use your waveforms and they'll stay there when you start rolling. It is such a better way to work for us video users. Every single record mode on the R5c is oversampled from that 8K sensor. This basically means that the entire camera behaves like the 4K HQ mode on the R5, which was by far my favorite mode to record in. The oversampling gives us very crisp, detailed images even when you're not in the full-blown 8K, and it lowers the noise floor down because you're oversampling. It makes for some beautiful results. You can see here in these tests that the 4K oversampled is very nearly as sharp and detailed as the 8K MP4. You don't get this advantage when you're at higher frame rates than 60p. The 4K 120 on the R5c does look a bit cleaner in terms of noise floor than the R5, but it doesn't seem to be any more detailed, unfortunately, but it still looks pretty good for 4K 120p. But you do get the advantages in 1080, where you can see a clear difference between the 1080p on the R5c and the 1080p on the R5. Which is important because a lot of us video creators do have to stick in 1080p quite a bit of the time. We now get 8K up to 60 frames a second in Canon RAW light. Now there is a bit of confusion about this. You do need to be running off of mains power or a third-party battery source that powers from the USB port or the dummy battery port in order to get full functionality in this mode, simply because the power draw of those LPE6 batteries is just not enough. But when I actually made my first look video, I thought you couldn't enable the 4K 60p. But with playing about with the camera a bit more, I realized you could. You just were limited in some areas. I did get autofocus and iris control with an EF lens on it, but I couldn't get image stabilization or any power to the Tascam unit, things like that. So you can get some 8K 60p off of internal batteries, but for full support, you definitely need to be running from a third-party power solution or mains power. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this one is anything revolutionary. We've seen MI shoes and XLR unit add-ons from Sony and Panasonic for many years now. But with the R5c, Canon have finally given us a video-orientated mirrorless camera with an MI shoe and an XLR add-on, in this case from Tascam, that is going to give us XLR inputs onto our camera body and better preamps. And this is just a huge deal for video users. It will really improve your audio workflow when working with these small cameras, effectively bringing it up to the standard which we're used to from cinema EOS models. So it is such a welcome change. I'm also really hopeful that because they're working with third-party add-ons, we will see more accessories using this in time. We don't quite know what the capabilities of the port are. This might be limited to audio products, for example, but who knows what could be made in the future. I think the future is quite bright for this MI shoe technology with Canon mirrorless. This next one is a controversial one. For some people this is going to be a plus, for some people this is going to be a con, but the R5c has no internal IBIS. It has a fixed sensor rather than a floating stabilized one. Now for some people they love that floating sensor, for some people they physically can't work with one if they're doing action scenes and car rigs, all that sort of stuff. We've got a video dedicated to this subject where we do a bunch of tests, which I'll link down below and was released last week. So make sure you check that out if you want to see the differences. But what the R5c does have is this digital IS technology, which we've seen on cameras like the C70, and it works really quite well. It's up for debate whether or not it's just as good as IBIS. Canon say it's better for video. We will have to wait and see there and do a bit more comprehensive testing perhaps. But it certainly is better than I think a lot of people expect. So you do get some stabilization, but it's not the internal IBIS, which we've seen on the R5. Tally and timecode is a big deal for any sorts of video recording, not just for multi-camera, of course, where it is hugely useful, but just for single camera as well. Being able to easily tell when your camera is recording is surprisingly useful in the video world, and is one of the main criticisms that I often hear about mirrorless cameras, is that it doesn't have a big enough light or a sound or something to let you know that you're recording video. The C70 that is recording me right now has a big red tally light on the front. I can so easily see that the camera is recording. The R5c is going to be the same. And timecode support makes it so much easier when syncing with external audio or different cameras. These are tiny things that Canon could have very easily left out of a camera like this, and yet they haven't. They've gone the extra mile, they've included them on this camera, whereas a lot of the competition doesn't have these features. And so I am very grateful to them for that. It's going to make a big difference to video users. The R5c now has a dual native ISO of 800 and 3200 when you're in Canon Log 3. Now it's the same sensor as the R5, and dual base ISO is a sensor technology. So we're not sure if the R5 has always had a dual native ISO all along, and from these high ISO tests we've done here, you can see the two cameras do perform pretty evenly. But the advantage of this now being an official thing and an actual genuine menu item in the camera rather than something that's just happening behind the scenes is that it means that we can put it on an assignable button. And we can just really quickly change between our dual native ISOs, which means that as video users, we get that peace of mind that we're always at a dual base ISO, and it means we're always getting the maximum dynamic range from the camera. Plus, the low-light performance of the R5 has always been pretty good, which puts the R5c, even though it's the same as the R5, as one of the best performing cinema EOS cameras at high ISOs. One of my main frustrations with the R5 for video was that if you wanted to have Canon Log 1 or Canon Log 3 enabled, the camera forced you into a 10-bit 422 H.265 or HEVC recording mode. There was no other options other than internal RAW. So that meant that handing files over to post-production was quite a challenge sometimes, and it had to be in that really processor-intensive H.265 recording options. On the R5c we get XFAVC. That's the same codec as we know from their cinema EOS cameras. Every post house should be familiar with that codec by now, and it's just going to mean that the R5c is accepted within that professional post-production environment. It's so much easier than the R5 was. Another small change that's going to make a big difference to us video users is the addition of WideDR. Because we now get that Cinema EOS UI on the camera, we get all of the gamma profiles that come with it, like WideDR. If you were using a Canon mirrorless camera as a B camera for your main camera that might be a Cinema EOS camera now, like the C70, a C300 Mark III or a C500 Mark II, you had to be in Canon log really to match the two cameras. Whereas now with the R5c, you get all the same gamma profiles, including WideDR, which is such a fantastic profile for quick and easy work without extensive grading in post-production. It's actually what's recording me right now. If you're more used to the Sony world, it's very similar to the S-Cinetone gamma profile over there, but it looks great, straight out of camera with a nice wide dynamic range. That's of course what WideDR stands for. It is very welcome indeed. So that's been our rundown of the 10 biggest changes with the R5c that are going to make the most difference to video users. Hopefully that's useful. Loads more content is going to be coming out on the R5c over the next few weeks, and make sure you stay tuned for all of those. And if you want to buy the R5c, of course, just head over to proav.co.uk with the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.